today for session 4 of the 2020 Black Philanthropy Month Lunch and Learn 6-part webinar series. This event is presented by Black Funders of St. Louis, who is a local giving circle. Our members are Black people from all walks of life who agreed to make our annual contribution of $300 or more, which is then pooled together with donations from non-members to award grants to Black-led nonprofits in St. Louis every year. Since 2017, we have awarded more than $10,000 to local organizations. In addition, we are encouraged to offer our time and our talent in support of Black-led nonprofits and the St. Louis community. Our work is rooted firmly in the pursuit of racial equity and a fairer St. Louis. So to learn more about us, our grant making, giving circles, and this webinar series, please be sure to visit our website, www.blackfundersstl.com. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our fiscal sponsor, Deaconess Foundation, which is providing the technical assistance for the webinar series for Black Philanthropy Month. Thank you so much, Deaconess. Today's session is client-based program design, and I'm excited to present Dr. Freda Thompson for this session. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So before Freda comes in, I'm going to just tell you just a little bit about her. So as I've said about a lot of our speakers, she's a big deal. So we're blessed to have her here today. Freda Thompson is the E. Desmond Lee Professor of Racial and Ethnic Studies at Washington University here in St. Louis. She is also the co-director of the Center for Community Health Research and Partnership, which is, I believe, a subsidiary of the Institute for Public Health. Her funded research addresses racial identity, socialization, and experiences of discrimination and their implications for well-being, as well as promotion of, I'm going to mispronounce this, so Freda's going to get a chance to correct me later on, colorectal cancer screening and HPV vaccination among African Americans. Her community engaged research supports community efforts to achieve equity in health. It's also worth noting that she's a published author. Freda, I am pleased to have you here today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen. Well, first, I think I'm going to go ahead and push this on slideshow, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and share this. Well, no, I'm not. That's not going to work. I'm going to share my screen, as I said before, and then I'll put it where it needs to go. Okay, come on. You got to hit all the right buttons at all the right times. Okay, so thanks, Brandon, for that mistake, because it allows me to put a plug in for some of my work. That term is colorectal cancer and colorectal cancer screening. And it's another one of those cancers where we have a huge disparity. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, please, if you have not screened, go ahead and complete your cancer screenings. I know we're in the midst of a pandemic, but health is broad, and despite the pandemic, the healthcare system has figured out how to safely deliver services, and you can be screened. You don't have to get a colonoscopy to be screened, but also complete your mammograms. And if your children are due for HPV vaccination, get that. So now I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to jump into my presentation. So it's titled, Give the People What They Want, Client-Based Program Design. And what I'm going to be talking about is why we value participatory planning in program design, I want to talk about the use of information and identifying the sources of information to have relevant information and data for your projects and programs. And then identify some useful tools that you can use to gain stakeholder information. I mean, there are a lot of sources of data, secondary data, that are helpful in designing programs and interventions, but nothing beats the information and the data you get from your stakeholder, your client, your stakeholder, their stakeholders, and constituencies. And then once you have that data, you got to think through, how do you take that information and translate it into useful strategies? And that's what I want to focus on today. So this slide has the steps to program planning and evaluation. And you might say, well, it said program design. Why is evaluation up there? In my mind, program design automatically includes evaluation. You need to know where you are with any program intervention that you're implementing. You need to know when it's time to modify, how you can improve. You don't want to be stale and stagnant. Every program, every project, every intervention can improve. And you want to know what the data are telling you about that so that you revise and you update as needed. So when I'm talking about this, evaluation is a must. And so it's there. The main thing to keep in mind with program planning is what your role is and what your job is. And your job is to help the client understand their needs. Your role is to gain their sense and their vision of the problems and the needs, but then to help them understand what it's going to take to refine that into something that is likely to be evidence-based, useful, acceptable, high quality intervention or service to their community, constituencies, other partners, population that they serve. That requires it gaining information and input and participation from those constituencies so that you can understand and your client can understand how that vision connects to what their stakeholders are thinking about, the lives they're living, the needs that they're prioritizing. And this allows, all of that work allows you to bring the stakeholder needs, values, concerns into alignment with the visions of your client, their set of resources, concerns, understandings of the community and what's going on. And once you are able to bring all of that into alignment, you can find the evidence on the most readily available current interventions and strategies. You can find all the data from the secondary sources that you need, and you can then begin to build and strategize to get everyone where they want to be. And so those steps are really identifying the problem. Your client is going to bring a problem, a need, an idea to you. I always warn people that when you're working in this area, you need to put a pause in almost everything you do so that you stop and say, okay, this is the first thing that's coming to us. This is the first thing we see. Is this really, truly the problem or the issue or the focus that we should be engaging in this moment? So you really want to think through that initial idea, issue, concern, problem, what have you, and make sure you've got it focused to the best of your ability at that point. And then you move to reviewing that existing data on the issue that I mentioned. That existing data comes in two forms. It's data on the resources in the community, the problems, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide, but it also can be information on programming, services, resources that are taking place in other places through other organizations that are being researched, so that you have an eye on what's best practice at this time and how does that relate to your problem, your issue, your concern. You don't want to completely reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. And you don't want to just do things so that you can be unique and novel with no sense of what works and what doesn't work, because you want to make sure you're taking high quality services to the community. Then you focus or refine your priority issues based on the relevant data. That data, that refinement, those processes could lead you to something that's region specific, more neighborhood specific. It depends on how the organization is thinking about the issue or the problem, but you also want it to be culturally appropriate. And once you've sort of narrowed and focused based on the region, the community, the neighborhood, or the cultural group that you're working with, you can move on. And then you want to identify, define and identify the risk factors for the identified issues and concerns. You want to select an evidence-based approach or the best known strategy to address the issue, and think through how you have to modify or adapt that to fit the locale, the community, the neighborhood, the specific population. And then you have to specify the resources that you will need, the activities that you anticipate having to complete, as well as the anticipated outcomes. And a part of that is thinking through what you believe will lead to the changes that you want to see or that your client wants to see. And from there, that type of work allows you to develop your evaluation plan. You're going to be looking at just the outputs, who attends, how often do they attend, do all the sessions occur as planned, etc. Then you want to start looking at your outcomes. Your outcomes are layered. What are your immediate or short-term outcomes? What are your intermediate or long-term outcomes? So let's talk a little bit about the secondary data that may be useful in designing programs that can assist your client in meeting their goals and communities and service areas with different populations. Being up to date and having information on the demographics of your catchment area, the people you want to serve, the community you want to serve, that information can tell you a lot about community assets, can tell you about behavior, disease prevalence, community needs that are more socioeconomic, that might be educational, barriers to program, how some of the community needs, some community behaviors will influence the type of programming that you want or need to do, or how people or how well people can access your programs. Community access can help you use a strengths-based approach where you're capitalizing on what's already going on, what people know, what they have to build. And so you're not reinventing the wheel. It helps you to better manage and use all of the resources available to you. You also want this data because you don't want to, if you can avoid it, duplicate existing services. In many communities, what you find is that resources and services are available. But if people don't know about currently existing resources, they may feel based on their experience that there's a gap, and then they do something that's duplicative. Now, the resources that you use to do something that's duplicative could mean that a real gap in that community is going unfilled. So we really strive to gather all of that data in advance so that you know what are real needs and concerns, what are perceived needs and concerns, what gaps do we really need to fill, um, do we need to refine different services, do we need to spend the time and the money to help promote, do we need to collaborate, what needs to really happen here. And this information is generally just seen as providing that social context that will also allow you to target or tailor strategies and interventions. You may say, what does she mean target or tailor? Targeting and tailoring are terms we use to say how much focus are we going to put into the services, the interventions, the programs that we do. If we're targeting, we're going to take a group and you refine the group that you're focusing on. Are you working with adolescents? Are you working with young adults? Are you working with middle school age children? You know, who are you working with? And you design your program to meet their needs, their developmental stage. That's an example of targeting. But I can gather and have enough information on members of a community by asking them in advance or during the time of programming and services that I can specify what I do to their unique, almost individual or maybe family circumstances. And that's more of an example of tailoring. And so when you're working, you're thinking about at what level do I want to work? Am I at the population or group level? Am I at the individual or family or couple level? And that tells you the amount of detail that you're going to want to use to plan and to develop your strategies and interventions. A lot of times, in addition to gathering that secondary data, you want to do things like have key informant interviews. And then you have to think about who you want to talk to. Who are the people who really know this area, know either the population or the neighborhood, the community, or the region that you are serving or that you want to serve. You can go to websites for the groups that are maintained by constituent groups in that community, by members of that population, to get a better sense of the culture. You can go to books that people may have written about the needs, concerns of people in a particular category. You can look at descriptions of neighborhoods that may be published or printed in books, magazines. You also want to spend some time understanding the diversity of various populations and communities. This helps you identify educational level differences that relate to educational level and literacy and the materials that you might have to develop for that community, differences in languages spoken, and translations and things that you might need to do. All of these are things that you want to make sure you're tapping into understanding before you actually start designing a program, an intervention, or a service. There are places you can go to gather data resources. If you're into some of the best data we have are the data produced by the US Census Bureau. And this is a chance for me to put in another plug. Really want people, if you haven't done the self-response, you can still do the self-response. If you do the self-response soon enough, if you don't like people knocking on your door, the census won't come to knock on your door. But I'm getting my plug in, particularly right now if you live in the city. But that data is great data, but the data are used to help us understand the populations we serve. The census does a great job of that. They update that data based on surveys that they send out almost yearly. And it's some of the best data that we have. So I encourage people to dig through that data. Look at the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. It provides us with labor and economic data, tells us about employment, unemployment. You can go to, I've got some websites listed here, Fed Stats, but there are other local sites. Both the county and the city health department have websites that have updated data on various diseases, but people think they only provide data on the diseases, but they provide up-to-date data on the demographics of the region that they serve. There's information there on the education, income. They provide data on the city website provides data on vacant lots and housing. There's a wealth of data there that can help you with your planning. Similarly, the state health department maintains websites that provide data on a range of issues relevant to your program planning. So for program development, step one is to engage your stakeholders. And a part of what you would do is work with your client to understand who the relevant stakeholders are. You know, who are the people who have a vested interest in this issue? That's one group that you know you're going to want to gather data from. Who are the people in leadership who you must reach out to, talk to, have input from? They may not have a vested interest in what you're doing, other than they have constituents who are affected by this issue or problem, but you want their overall input and support for the work that you do. You never know what resources they can assist you in acquiring and obtaining, but also because sometimes they have early or firsthand knowledge and information that you will need. And then other people who you may need as partners as you try to implement your program, or as you want to get the word out about your program and you want them to assist in helping with that process. So you really want to help the client think through, who should we include in this planning process? This work can assist with the activities and the overall implementation of the project. It can assist with advocacy for resources devoted to the project. It will help you long-term in terms of sustainability of the program and the services and the work that you do. And in addition, it can help provide credibility to your program, project, or initiative. You also want this material, and you want to be inclusive and reach out to your stakeholders, because it assists you in designing effective materials and interventions. You, by engaging in that outreach and getting that input from stakeholders, you make sure that the audience segments feel messages and activities are meaningful and relevant in their lives. That increases acceptance of the interventions and services that you are working on, developing, focused on delivering. And also, you want to understand the cultural and social context of each audience segment. In that way, you avoid strategies, language, ideas that may be turnoffs to certain segments of the community, might be offensive to certain segments of the community, but also that just create and put up barriers, whether those barriers are emotional, psychological, social, or barriers that might, well, and within that social realm, barriers that relate to, say, transportation, um, access because of cost, location, anything like that. Or sometimes it's because the materials and what you're asking are pitched at a level that don't fit that community due to education or literacy. So any of these things can come up, and all of this legwork that I'm asking you to think about helps you address those. Now, there are a number of strategies that can be used to obtain information from stakeholders, depending on who those stakeholders are. So I put up this slide because in some of the work that I do, when I'm thinking through helping with programming to address experiences of discrimination, it's important to know what the rates of discrimination as reported in some of our better known statistical systems are. And so I will routinely go in and pull the data on the discrimination that people are reporting, say, in the Justice Department stats. And so I just put this slide in because this is one that I will routinely do. And you just go to FBI.gov and yes, they have hate crime stats, and you pull off the latest data. But in addition to pulling off that data, you can obtain input and feedback in your local communities and neighborhoods from various stakeholders. I mentioned doing key informant interviews, but you can do brainstorming sessions. You can do nominal group process. You can do Delphi decision making. You can use storyboards, or you can use things like cafes. So I'm going to walk you through for just a few minutes some of these strategies that can be incorporated to help you gain input. And I think as you do this, it's important that your client understand what you're doing and why, and be on board. Some of these are processes that you can engage in with your client and their organization. So I think the first place to start is, how do the staff and administrators who in that organization feel about the problem, the need, what's their sense based on their experience of that community, their catchment area, the population they serve, of what's needed. How did they develop those ideas and beliefs? But you want that input that you're seeking to start within the organization itself. And so you do some work with them, and then they can also brainstorm with you and help you figure out the relevant stakeholder groups, and also help you think about the best strategies for gaining input from them. So it's not a solo process. You're gaining input beginning at the end, from the inside, and working your way to the outside. But one strategy is nominal group process. It's a variation on a small group discussion. You can encourage people who've not previously felt that they had a voice to speak out, to participate and join. And surprisingly, sometimes when you're working with organizations, the staff are that first group of people who felt like they don't really have a voice to speak out. Very often those in leadership have decided on problems, issues, and concerns, and have some ideas about the appropriate strategies for intervention, but they haven't included their staffs. And with your guidance, going back and getting that input can enrich the perception, the thinking about the issue and problem that you're dealing with. And so when you're doing this, you have small groups, about 5 to 6 people seated near each other. You state an open-ended task and where you want them to begin efforts well, that's my example. I used this when I was working with groups in a rural area to promote smoke-free environments. And so gave them the task and asked them where they thought they needed to start to gain support for those smoke-free environments. So it's really posing the question, giving them some time to think about their experiences and their work, and then having them share together and then refine their sharing down into the recommendations that they would like to make. A lot of times, if we have multiple of these small groups, we come back together and the groups share out what they found, what they've come up with. So here I outline the full process with each person individually brainstorming ideas. And you might say, why do you let the individual brainstorm ideas first? One of the things we know is that if the group starts before an individual has put their ideas down on paper, groupthink often sets in and people will listen to other people, set aside their ideas and go with the group ideas. The beauty of groups is that if you get all those diverse ideas, you've got a nice pool to pull from, and the best ideas come from large pools of ideas, not narrow and attenuated or constrained pools. So you always let people pull their thoughts and ideas together. Then give the task and let the group start to share ideas. And you can do it so that one response per person each time. That way you get ideas from everyone. When they start to overlap, you can then just ask people to share ideas that haven't been shared. The request is people can ask questions to clarify thinking, to clarify what people meant, but no one criticizes. Why not? Why no one criticizes? Because when people start becoming critical of ideas, people start shutting down and failing to share their ideas, or hold back their ideas. And then after you've gotten all those unique ideas down, everyone gets dots or some stickers or some way to indicate, or you can give people markers and tell them to mark their favorite suggestions. And then the group can report out the top 3 ideas. And then it can go to a larger group. You bring all your smaller groups back together and it comes back to the larger group. And the group each group reports out their top 3 again, and then the larger group can go through the same process and vote. And then you can have the best ideas out of everyone present. Now, the size of the organization or the size of the group attending will dictate how many rounds of this you do, but it's a great way to get everyone involved and get ideas going. Delphi decision-making process. And this is done to encourage a group of key informants, gatekeepers, or experts to give suggestions or share opinions in decision-making process. I just finished some work where we use this, but we did a little spin on it. We didn't just stick with the traditional gatekeepers and experts. We brought in community members. Community members who had experience with the issue and problem, and they worked alongside the gatekeepers and experts. And it was interesting because those experts hearing input from those people with experience with the issue helped them to refine and rethink some of their positions. And I think it created a richer process. So I throw that in just so you can think about the fact that we don't always have to do these things the way they've always been done. Think about the ways that you can make material more inclusive rather than keeping them less inclusive. So you ask them to give their suggestions and opinions, but you do this through the creation of a set of questions relevant to the work that you want to do. So if you want to know about their experience in service provision to a population, you may want to know what they see as, say, the social emotional needs of people experiencing a particular set of problems, whether it's being in the criminal justice system, the social welfare system, whether it's while they're around managing unemployment. You create the set of questions relevant to the issues that you want to address, the services that you think might, well, the issues, the components of the service or intervention that you think would be relevant for that population or the issue that you have putting forward. You have to carefully select your participants. They need to be key to the success of your effort, but that's another reason for bringing in people who actually live with the problem or deal with the issue. If it's health, bring in patients. If it has to do with children, and education, bring in the parents of children. If it has to do with adolescents, yes, you want to figure out a structure so you can include some of those adolescent voices. And you invite each participant to answer questions or give feedback. You collect and summarize and report that back to them. Now, in most situations today, we usually do this via online surveys, which are quite easy to program and administer. Um, if necessary, you can use paper surveys, but when you're using online surveys today, you can format those so that they are accessible by a smartphone as well as a computer. And so it makes it super easy for lots of people to participate. But I always warn people, we assume everyone has access either by phone or computer, but we know, and the Pew data indicate that there are still people who we want to reach and want to serve who can't, who still can't. If it's for no other reason than they can't easily get a hotspot for that smartphone, or their internet connection is unstable. And so, keep that in mind and keep some of those non Wi-Fi technology strategies available to people. And so, as I said, you can ask for that feedback by mail, email, and you report that back the same way. However, people deliver that information to you, that's probably how you should provide them the feedback. Sometimes you bring together the group in a meeting and you report that information back in the meeting. You can do the Delphi process in meetings over and do rounds over a day or a couple of days. Or you can do a combination strategy. The one that I just finished, we actually did a combination strategy. We used the email, but people were able to access by smartphone as well. And we had some people who did that, but we also did some using paper pencil. And we provided feedback in some of the ways. And then we brought people together for face-to-face. Now, the other thing that we did, before we sent out our links and for the email, for the internet and the internet survey, we held a webinar. And with Zoom and the low cost of Zoom, you can hop on for 30 minutes. We went over all the details of completing it, explained everything to everyone and reminded them why we were doing it again. And I think that helps increase interest and participation and the quality of the information that you get back. And each person, once you give that feedback, each person then evaluates the ideas and provides feedback on the information that you have sent them based on the first round. Now, in that second round, you're still asking questions related to the data, related to the feedback that the data provides you, and then you ask them to respond to that data your interpretation of that data and any new questions that emerge based on that data. Ideas that are not supported fall off the next round, and you continue as many rounds as needed. In the one that I just finished, we started with a idea that we were going to do a 4-round process, but we ended up doing a 5-round process because we needed that in order to assure that we had consensus from the group on what their recommendations and suggestions were for us. Another idea really is good if you're working with people for whom words don't come easily, who aren't as engaged in sharing things through written forms and verbalizing things in large groups who aren't as comfortable talking. You can do storyboards, and you really encourage individuals to share their stories and information regarding obstacles relevant to their experience in the environment. You can prepare the storyboard icons. There are lots of different ways you can do this. We did this. We created something we call Create a Mag. It was we were creating a magazine. And so we asked people to help us create that magazine. We cut out things from magazines. We bought stencils. We bought crayons, markers, color pencils. We gave them large and different size sheets of paper. We had words available for them, letters. And we said, first create the front, the lead page of the magazine design. And then we asked them to mock up with headlines and some story and idea suggestions, some follow-up pages. What would they want to see in this magazine? Now, this was going to be a health magazine. So we told them that it's going to be a health magazine. What do you want to see? What do you want to hear? What do you want to know? You can do it with real storyboards with Velcro on them and things that they can attach to the board. You can put the felt on the board and have little Velcro things that they can use to attach things. Up here I have that you can use photographs, you can use clip art. There are so many ways you can do something like this, but it allows people to give you a sense of what they're thinking about, whether it's how they want materials that you may want to provide to them created. It could be how they want a building or a space that you're creating to serve them to look. What do they want the environment to look like where they're receiving services or where you're completing or doing an intervention with them or offering a program. You can be asking them to talk about the community in the neighborhood and show you what in that neighborhood makes it difficult for them to engage in activities or services relevant to what you want to do. You can set it up as an individual activity or small groups of about 3 to 4, because you don't want, when you do groups, you think about the size of the group based on the extent to which you feel like there might be influence and someone's voices might be muted. And so you think through those issues, but it can be a great way to get people to open up and share who might not otherwise open up and share. You basically bring them in, explain storyboarding. You show them all the icons, all the materials you have available. You let them know they can use any of the materials that they desire. They don't have to use all of them. And they can organize it, put it up based on what makes sense to them, what they want to share. And usually following up, we ask people to walk us through and talk about what they put together and why. So some other things you can do, you can ask participants to place positives about the environment and sources of support in the top half of the board, and place barriers and obstacles in the lower half, you can ask them to represent an ideal state of affairs in their community. And then you can ask them to also represent the current state of affairs in their community. Whatever you ask them to do, know that this process is going to take a while, even with a small group or even with an individual, for them to get this done and work on this. Honestly, with youth, I've done this with youth, and I found that I have to give them extra time, more time than I give the adults, because very often they get engrossed and engaged, and they add and embellish beyond what I asked for. And if people are really engaged in the process, I don't stop them, because I know that for some reason it's speaking to them, and whatever information in their lives they think they need to share in order to address what I ask is information that I really need. And once you're finished, you ask people to share why they did what they did, why they put things where they did. And you record those responses, and then you have to analyze that data. Now, another process that we use that has become one of my absolute favorites is the community cafe process. And community cafes are based on the World Cafe model. And you probably have heard of World Cafe, although you probably have not heard of Community Cafe. And it's another way of sharing what you know and what you're thinking and what you're planning with the community and with the stakeholders, all the relevant stakeholders as a group. So say you've done some storyboarding and you've gotten some information there. You've collected and gathered all of the secondary data that you were interested in. Your experts have participated in the Delphi process and have given you all of this great information. And you've had some groups in the organization who've done the nominal group process. Your team takes that information and synthesizes it into a coherent narrative of the state of affairs of that locale. Who's here? What are the conditions under which they live? What opportunities and barriers do these present? What are the community resources and assets that can speak to those barriers? And what are the community assets that can be enhanced and built upon as you engage in change work in that community? You can then also share out the ideas that the experts have for what's worked in other places and what people should be thinking about. And then you can share what members of the community have already suggested and shared and what they see as relevant based on their personal experience. And then you can share out what the staff, based on the work that they're doing in the community, think and see as relevant. And using that, you can bring together all of your relevant stakeholders, some representatives from the staff, from the administration, leadership in that community. They could be political, a few people from the, say, religious community. You can bring in some business owners. You could bring in people from the educational realm, as well as members of the community who will be affected. And you are going to present this to them. You want them to be in dialogue to begin to help you think about what program, what service, what should we build? What intervention should we be building? And so just to help you understand the design of community cafes, the reason that I love them is because they equalize the power among all the people who come together in that space. And you help to do that by creating a hospitable space for everyone. You make the space fun, you make it welcoming. When people host cafes, they emphasize the power and importance of making a space feel safe and inviting for people, making them feel comfortable so that they can be themselves. No one's judging anyone else. What we say when we do cafes, even to the experts, you are not an expert here. We all have expertise in some aspect of this work, and we're here to share. So we don't use titles. Everyone participates. No one's critiquing anyone. There's we're creating an environment where everyone does their most creative thinking, speaking, and listening. Um, and so we set it up with round tables. We'll use square tables or rectangle tables if we have to, but we want round tables. We usually have some music because everyone calms down with music. People come together with food, so we often feed people. And we carefully craft the questions that we're going to ask. We make sure we're asking questions that are relevant to that community, to that population, to that group that you want to serve, that are going to attract the insights, the best insights that people have, the most creative thoughts that they have, that are going to allow the most people to provide input. We do multiple rounds of questioning so that people can consider each aspect of the issue in turn. All the tables have hosts who lead, who keep us faithful to the agreements that we make, which are to be respectful, everyone share, no one critique, no one judge, making sure that all voices are heard. And the group works to connect diverse perspectives as people begin to share their thoughts and ideas. Everyone's participation is respected and encouraged. The host, you have table hosts, but the hosts move around listening for patterns, insights, and connections, and making sure that you're working to keep those voices sharing. So that's one way. And you report out, and the group gets that information of what was harvested and collected from all the tables and from that session. And then the team can take that back and begin to use that and all the data and information that have been developed to craft a program and intervention or a plan for programs and interventions that you can then bring your stakeholder group back to react to. And so bottom line is that this is the point where you're at step 2, where you're going to describe the program. You've taken all of that information and developed a comprehensive description of all the components in the program. You've got the mission, the vision, the goals for the program. You develop your logic model, you come up with activities, the outcome, and the impact that you're looking for. And this is an example of a logic model using it basically as a series of if-then statements. You focus on your resources. What do you need to run this program? Based on what you learn from your experts, what you learn about this problem in the area, what community members have shared with you, what local leaders have shared with you, what resources are needed to run it. And if you have access to those resources, then what can you accomplish with your activities? What do you need to do? And then once you know what you need to do, what can you expect to accomplish? Those are your outputs. And if you accomplish those things and you deliver your services as you plan, which you would track, those outputs can be tracked, then what are the outcomes? And if you deliver the services as planned and you got these outcomes that you've been tracking, there should be some benefits for the clients, the communities, the systems, and the organizations. And what are those? And all of these things are interconnected, one thing leading to the next. And so An example might be with the inputs, you need staff, you need money. So you might have some staff, but you might need more staff. Then you need your money, you need your research team or more research information, or an evaluation team to help you with all the tracking and monitoring. What equipment will you need? If this involves, say, physical activity for middle school children, that's different than the equipment you might have available. Maybe it was all targeted toward toddlers and early childhood groups, because that's who lived in the neighborhood when this area was first developed. So what new equipment do you need? What types of facilities? What should the expertise of the staff be? And then for the activities, the training, what training are you doing? Are you doing any education, outreach? If it's health related, is it vaccines, support groups? Really, the activities are going to be related to your issue, your problem. I threw some things up there that could be examples. Outputs are things like the number of people reached, the number of people served, and if it was vaccination, the number of people vaccinated. How many days did it take you to achieve those numbers? What days did you meet? How many people per day? How many hours of contact, or how much contact time went into each person served or every group served? All of those are your outputs. And then your outcomes, which will determine your impact, are your short-term, intermediate, and long-term impacts. And in order to sort of set up your evaluation and your tracking, we encourage people to, of course, use SMART goals. And so we really want to know the who, what, how much, or what type of change you are looking for. Where do you expect the change, and what, and by when? So you might be looking, depending on what you're doing and what your client is asking you to focus on, you might be thinking about individual participants, but you could be thinking about organizations or entities and institutions. If it's participants, we're usually thinking about some increase or decrease in some knowledge or some behavior or some activity. Organizations, you're often thinking of improvements, modifications, or for institutions, you may be thinking about adopting some practice or some policy, or better enforcing some policy or practice. Areas for participants can be knowledge, awareness, or behaviors, and organizations, it can be behaviors, behaviors, activities, those things. Institutions, policies, practices. You can have your time frame be whatever makes the most sense for your organization, for your activity, for those who are funding you and supporting you. So it could be 1 year, 2 years, whatever is going to work best for you. And the main thing, and the reason we call them SMART goals, is because they need to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time frame. And if you take the first letter there, you get SMART. And so you know why they do it. Some people refer to that specific as strategic. And so the goal answers the question of who and what. So who's going to do it, or what's going to be done? It's got to be very specific, measurable. The goals can be measured and answers the question how. Attainable, goals are realistic and can be achieved in a specific amount of time. Relevant, you've included the expected result. And time frame, you just have to know exactly what your target and what your deadline is for this. And so really the test of whether or not you've done a really good job with your SMART goals is the extent to which you can use these to map out things in your logic model. Once you know your resources, that specificity should help you understand your activities. Who's doing what? When are they doing it? How are they doing it? That how they're doing it, where they're doing it. Again, the who's doing it can help you with your outputs. Having them be attainable and measurement, that what are they doing to achieve what goal, going back to the specificity there, to achieve what goal, what outcome, what result. That helps you with your outcomes and ultimately your impact. It tells you what you're going to measure. And your team has to figure out the best way to capture and measure those things and over what time. So bottom line, client-based program development is really about input and feedback. In every description that I provided to you, you are seeking input from your client, from those who work for your client, for those your client serves or seeks to serve, from the leadership in the region, the community, the locale that your client is working with, identifying those leaders who are most strategic for the work that that client does. You are also bringing in those who have the most to lose or gain based on the work of that client. And you are gathering all of that and working to assure that everyone's voice has been heard, harmonized, and that the plan that you help, or the program that you help to design, the plan you help to create, the intervention, meets the needs of those to be served and those affected. What some people refer to this as cultural adaptation, cultural competence, community participation, patient, family centered participation. But no matter what you call it, at the heart of it is, it's really speaking to the fact that we have to listen and communicate. Communication should be ongoing throughout that process of developing that program, that design for that program. We do a better job of developing interventions and programs when we work on tasks together, and we have to find ways to engage everyone in the process in ways that make it possible for them to do their best, most creative work and to share authentically. And so with that, I am going to stop and see if people have questions for me. Brandon, would you like for me to take my...
No, you stay on screen. So I want to acknowledge we are a little bit over time, folks. I think there was one question around how to develop an evaluation plan. And before I let Freda answer that, I'm going to share my screen. As you guys know, I always try to give a couple of resources while we're in the process of this. So give me just a second. Can you see my screen, Freda?
Yes.
Okay. So I followed along, learning as everyone else did, and I'm going to offer you guys some additional resources. I'm on the St. Louis County website. One of the things that Freda talked about was being able to have research. A big part of that is understanding your clientele and making sure you understand them as well as others, okay? So you can do this through the St. Louis County website or the St. Louis City website. You're going to go to the research tab. You're going to go down to resources A through Z. You're going to click on D, and you're going to see something called Demographics Now for Libraries. And this is going to pop up. I'm going to take this off so you guys don't see my library card number. You can use this resource. I can guarantee that most of us can't afford to buy this. Okay, it costs several thousands of dollars. You can use Demographics Now. It's a tool that's used by businesses, colleges, large institutions, and you can use it for free. You can do a drill down on everything you want to know about a neighborhood, about a group of people, including how they prefer to be communicated with, okay? Literally everything, income, whether they're renters, whether they're homeowners, whether their neighborhood is projected to become more middle class, whether their neighborhood is projected to become more gentrified or more impoverished, okay? Really important. You can see here as an example on the screen, I've pulled up a YouTube. It shows you just one of the many charts that it do. It'll even take a neighborhood or a zip code and break it down into subgroups so you know what that neighborhood is mostly comprised of, whether the senior population is growing or diminishing, et cetera, et cetera. In addition, this is probably one of my favorite websites. It's existed since the 90s. It's called Free Management Library. They have a huge section on just about everything related to nonprofit management. You can see I'm on the program design section. There's a huge section of links here. You click on it, takes you to additional resources, which takes you to more resources. Finally, Freda talked about logic models, and there was a question about how to develop an evaluation plan. And you might have noticed that she based a lot of her presentation around this, and wisely so, because a lot of funders look to logic models as a way to demonstrate that you've thought out your program well. If you use this, which is free, you see there's a download link over to the right of the screen. You have to type in your name, your email address. It goes to a foundation. It's no big deal. Once you do that, they allow you to open up the document, and it'll show you how to build a logic model, which will take you through a process of thinking about whether your program is really about your organization or about the people that it serves, okay? It'll help you drill down to what real goals and objectives are and what real outcomes are, and it will take you through an evaluation process, and it'll even take you through a process of learning how to create evaluation questions that may be based off of, as you see on the screen, context, implementation, or outcomes, right? Evaluation happens at various levels. So I did want to share that. And then I want to give you an opportunity if you want to speak directly to that question of whether you have any insight on how to develop an evaluation plan.
In the time that we have, I think you gave them the best resource, and I deliberately didn't get into that because normally it would take a whole
nother session
class just to do the evaluation part. We were just talking about the program planning part, but yes. No, that using that model, and then there are also fairly often free trainings. One resource I am going to plug though, through our Center for Community Health Partnership and Research, we, people who partner with us, we frequently during the summer provide them with the opportunity to apply to attend some of the training courses in our professional development series through the Brown School. So one of those courses is on evaluation planning.
That's awesome.
And so you can have a week to work with people who will walk you through that process. And so follow our website. We post on that website when those opportunities are available. Or if you send your contact information to me, I can put you in our database. And when that comes up, we will send you notification that that opportunity is open for the summer.
That's absolutely awesome. So the logic model that I showed you, if you go to the chat box, not the question box, you'll see that I've included a link to that document. I think I actually included a link so you can open it up without signing in your name and your email address. I hope this was helpful. I think it was interesting that you gave us about 5 ways to actually engage clients and community members and other stakeholders. Some of those I've been using. I've been at this for a long time, and some of those I've been using, and I didn't have a name for them. So now I have a name for it. And I say that specifically for folks. It's important that you figure out if what you're doing has a name. You don't want to end up in a room with funders or colleagues and be using an approach and not realize that you stumbled on something. You want to always be able to demonstrate that you have the same capacity and understanding that others have. So again, I want to thank Freda for joining us today. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We still have 2 more sessions. Tuesday is civic engagement and voting. We'll have Kim Gardner, our city circuit attorney. We'll have Don Calloway, who's a former state representative and now political strategist. We'll have Rasheen Aldridge, who's a fantastic state rep and fantastic organizer of Expect Us. Kayla Reed, who's also an organizer with Action St. Louis. And then we'll do our national roundtable discussion with Black giving circles from across the United States. I believe it's the first time it's ever been done in a webinar fashion. So I want to thank you again. Do you have any last parting words for folks?
No, thank you for tolerating me going overtime. I'm sorry, but hopefully this was helpful to you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Take care.